Hello, I'm Stephen Cole, and you're at the Listening Post's Military and Media Special. This week, war, Hollywood movies, and getting the story right. With more than a little help from the Pentagon. The video war games that are literally putting youngsters into the firing line.
You guys want a real challenge?
The investigation that blew the lid off the Pentagon's efforts to sell the Iraq War on news programs. And George Bush does his bit for military recruitment.
We need more boys to be in them Hummers shooting.
With a little hand from Destiny's Child. Welcome back. Propaganda can be defined as an attempt to manipulate public opinion, but when is propaganda not considered propaganda? The answer, when it comes in the guise of a Hollywood blockbuster. War movie lovers are often unaware that the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and even the Department of Defense itself have established a full-scale one-stop shop occupying an entire floor of a Los Angeles office building. Why, you may ask? Well, to work ever more closely with filmmakers to ensure they make movies the military way. The Listening Post's Salah Kadar has been investigating.
For as long as there have been movies, the US government and filmmakers have been collaborating to make films that put their side in the best light. That was certainly the case with Frank Capra, Walt Disney, and the 1942 series, Why We Fight.
The Why We Fight orientation films, fashioned by Hollywood-trained craftsmen.
Hollywood has long loved telling the story of soldiers and war. Whether it be Errol Flynn parachuting into the Japanese-occupied Burmese jungle, or more recently Ben Affleck avenging the attacks on the US Navy at Pearl Harbor. But the role that the real American military plays in helping to craft its depiction in these popular movies is not as open a secret.
The Pentagon has a very cozy relationship with Hollywood that goes back about 50 years. World War II represented a big boon for military Hollywood collaboration. And in fact, each branch of the military has its own entertainment and Hollywood liaison office, including the CIA and Homeland Security now. And most of these are based in Los Angeles to be closer to the image makers.
Josh Rushing, who now works as a reporter for Al Jazeera English, was once one of those liaison officers.
The truth is the military is in Hollywood to try to get the story right in films because it recognizes how powerful Hollywood is in shaping people's perceptions about what the military is and what the military isn't.
But what can Hollywood studios and producers expect in return for giving the military big screen time?
They will get very, very cheap access to military locations. They will get very cheap access to military hardware, which runs the gamut from submarines to tanks to planes. And they will get very, very cheap access, probably sometimes free access to soldiers, to troops, to serve as extras in the film. So it makes sense on a kind of business level to do it because it keeps the cost of the film down.
You can't just go down to your local Army surplus supply shop and pick up these goods. In fact, no matter how much money you have, you can't buy them. The only place you can get them is on loan from the Pentagon's Hollywood Liaison Office.
Yet hardware is not the full extent of this relationship. The Pentagon often provides active duty military personnel for technical consultation and even to do some of the stunts.
What you get when you have the Department of Defense signs on to the thing is an advisor who comes out and watches and says, no, that's wrong, or this is right. We do want to show what the military does for the country, and we show off what professional people they are, and if we can help to make it a realistic portrait of what we do, then it's to our advantage to assist in a production like this.
That was certainly the case with the film Black Hawk Down, produced by Jerry Bruckheimer, which chronicled the 1993 US raid on Somalia. Shot on location in Morocco, this production used over 100 soldiers to do these action scenes and combat sequences.
When Black Hawk Down came out, Jerry Bruckheimer was invited to the White House and they had a showing of Black Hawk Down with George W. Bush. So the certain directors are favored because they treat the topic very lovingly.
So who really has creative control over the product? The filmmakers or the Pentagon?
If you are making a film where you submit the script to the military beforehand, you're working with the military throughout production, and then you let the military vet the film at the end before anyone can see it, basically you're making a commercial for the military. There's no two ways about it.
However, both critics and supporters of the US military's role in Hollywood do agree on one thing. Being seen in movies can be both a powerful and cost-effective way for the armed forces to reach potential new recruits.
I feel the need for speed.
Top Gun comes about as close as you can get to an actual Pentagon production without having the Pentagon name on it. This was an enormous commercial success, but it was also an enormous recruiting success. Military recruiters actually set up tables outside of movie theaters all across the country in order to catch folks coming out of this film. This really represented a watershed moment in Hollywood liaison office thinking about the potential for film to act as a recruiting poster.
You can look at a movie like Full Metal Jacket. The first half of the movie by Stanley Kubrick shows how horrific Marine Corps boot camp is and how mean and terrible the drill instructors are. You would think this is some really sadistic stuff. It did tons for Marine Corps recruiting. As a matter of fact, I saw that movie as a teenager and wondered, could I take it? Could I do that?
This cozy relationship has been dubbed the Military Entertainment Complex, or militainment.
I think the sensibility of militainment in media coverage really came about after 9/11, when Karl Rove and other members of the White House met with the important producers and directors in the Hollywood industry and said, help us tell the story of the military to the American people so we can fight this war on terror.
We're certainly seeing a post-9/11 effect on Hollywood filmmaking, not necessarily in films which are literally about the war on terror or about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, I think we're seeing, for example, a film like Transformers. I think we're seeing that transposed by filmmakers who maybe in another era, for example, in Vietnam, would have made a jingoistic film, a pro-military film, this time taking that attitude into a more mainstream commercial niche.
Now, Transformers is a kind of total fantasy, and yet it does paint the US military in a pretty good light. And it has a lot of kind of real loving, almost kind of pornographic shots of state-of-the-art helicopters landing in Qatar.
When I was representing the Marine Corps in Hollywood, the movie Jarhead did come to my office. It did request support, but there were several things in the script that we believed were inaccurate, and so we didn't give it support. I actually said no to supporting that film.
But why don't more people know about what's going on behind the glitz of the silver screen?
The only clue that you're making a commercial to the US military is a tiny little credit line that usually says thanks to the US military that no one's ever going to see. So they're watching it and they don't even know they're watching a commercial.
Hollywood producers are not eager to tell everyone that their films are being influenced by military public relations. I think most people are made queasy by product placement in films. I think they're made even queasier by the thought of government propaganda in films.
I think the military always hides its desire because the American public pride themselves on not being the recipients of propaganda. I think if that were revealed, some of these practices and behind the scenes and the way that imagery is really shaped, I think that the American people would be able to see through it better and be more critical of it.
Salah Kadar reporting. And here's how our global village voices see that story.
The media industry, such as news organization and Hollywood, are interconnected with the military establishment in various ways. For decades, media have been powerful instruments of war. Therefore, in the realm of popular culture, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by military organizations.
You've got to remember the US military is an enormous machine that is constantly in need of recruits. And one of the most effective ways of recruiting is to glamorize and dramatize military life. And what movies do very effectively is perform that role for them. During the Second World War, they had some very positive experiences with a lot of semi-propaganda movies which portrayed the military in a very positive light. Then you had a very bruising experience with the Vietnam War, where Hollywood kind of turned on the US military and where it was portrayed in quite a negative light. In the 1980s, Top Gun sort of wrote the book on modern media management.
If you've got something to say about the media and want to be one of our global village voices, just email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. We want to hear from you wherever you are. A time for some Listening Post military media news bites. Hollywood may have close ties with the Pentagon, but in the last few years, films with an Iraqi war theme have bombed at the box office. Growing popular disenchantment with the war may account for films like Lions for Lambs, Rendition, and Redacted failing to pull in the big audiences. In the Valley of Elah, despite featuring big-name stars Tommy Lee Jones and Charlize Theron, only grossed $6.5 million in the US over 6 weeks. Filmmakers may not be feeling war fatigue, but film-goers certainly seem to be.
We simply cannot allow their form of evil and terror to spread.
The military-media nexus isn't just at work on the silver screen. General Electric, which owns television networks NBC, MSNBC, and CNBC, also has major defense interests. As a subcontractor for the US Air Force's flagship Tomahawk and Patriot II missile, the corporation earns much of its revenue from deals with the Pentagon. Now, this vested interest has regularly thrown up questions about the independence of the news coverage on GE's television channels. NBC reporters, including the late David Bloom, came under fire for their sanitized and glamorized reporting of the early stages of the Iraqi war. But it's not just the reporting of the conflict that caused controversy.
Kind of a big deal that some journalists were embedded with the troops. Well, this is great. As it turns out, it was more of an exchange program because they actually also had troops embedded with the journalists.
It's the credibility of the on-air analyst as well. In a 2-year investigation that blew the lid off the Pentagon's spin tactics during the Iraqi war, the New York Times published documents and minutes of meetings which revealed how former US military men were trained by the Pentagon to put out the administration line. This campaign was masterminded by the then Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and involved retired US military personnel who went on American news networks to help sell the war.
Hard as nails. That's what they're saying about Private First Class Jessica Lynch.
The job of the pro-war US media was eased by the Pentagon's regular serving up of action heroes such as Jessica Lynch and Pat Tillman, whose stories could be sensationalized to further the war and boost ratings. Lynch's capture in an ambush in Iraq in 2003 was plastered all over the US TV news networks, although it later transpired that she never actually fired a bullet. She was still portrayed as a little girl Rambo. A year later, GE's NBC broadcast this dramatized and inaccurate version of her story. Her fellow pawn in the propaganda war was football player turned soldier Patrick Tillman. Initial reports claimed that this all-American action hero had been gunned down in Afghanistan by the Taliban. But it soon became clear he died under accidental fire from his own side.
The Pentagon is under fire for concocting stories about 2 war heroes.
The manipulation of the Lynch and Tillman stories came back into the news 4 years after the incidents occurred. A persistent campaign to bring the cases before the US Congress saw Jessica Lynch and Pat Tillman's families testifying and expressing their dissatisfaction with the Pentagon's use of their stories for political ends. Coming up after the break, the new recruiting officer, the military war game.